So welcome everyone. My name is Catherine Cornell, and in name of the organizing committee of this symposium, I want to welcome you all to this year's Boston College Symposium on Interreligious Dialogue. This is the fourth in a series of conferences that we have organized on different topics. It brings together scholars from different religions and from different parts of the world to reflect on critical questions in the dialogue between religions. The first conference took place in 2008, and the topic of the conference was interreligious criteria of discernment in interreligious dialogue. The next year, we had a conference on interreligious hermeneutics. Last year, we had a conference on interreligious dialogue and economic development. And the volumes that were published out of those symposia are available for you in the back of the room. The topic of this year's symposium is interreligious dialogue and the cultural shaping of religions. So the focus of this conference is really on the ways in which religions, when they enter into particular cultures, inevitably enter into dialogue with the religions that have traditionally shaped those cultures. And conversely also, when religions enter into dialogue with one another, they also enter into dialogue with the cultures that have shaped the religions. So the questions that we are asking this year are, among other questions, how religions negotiate their identity when they enter into dialogue with other religions and cultures. This is a very big question, of course, and in order to narrow the focus a little bit, this year we are focusing on the context of the United States, which has become, as you know, a melting pot for different religions. So we are very happy and honored to have again a number of very distinguished scholars from different religions who have come to Boston College, and for the next 2 days we will be at the conference center of Boston College in Dover, focusing on these questions from different religious perspectives. But tonight we have all gathered to hear the opening plenary, which will be given by Professor Peter Phan. And before I introduce him, I would like to give the floor to Professor Mark Massa, who is the Dean of the School of Theology and Ministry and also a noted specialist of American Catholicism. So.
Just a quick note, we at the STM are delighted to co-sponsor this event for my good friend Peter Phan, a distinguished scholar. Catherine asked me to read to you Peter's 50 most recent citations. Just kidding. No. So welcome.
Again, there are a few more spots here in front, and I hate to see them empty if you have to stand for the whole hour and a half. So please don't be shy, come and have a seat. So this year we are very happy to have as our plenary speaker Professor Peter Phan. Professor Phan holds the Ellacuria Chair of Catholic Social Thought at Georgetown University, where he's also the founding director of the PhD program in Theology and Religious Studies. He has earned 3 doctorates, one from the Universitas Pontificia Salesiana in Rome and 2 from the University of London. Professor Phan began his teaching career in philosophy at the age of 18 at Don Bosco College in Hong Kong. In the United States, he has taught at the University of Dallas, the Catholic University of America, where he held the Warren Blanding Chair of Religion and Culture. He has also taught at Union Theological Seminary, at Elms College, and at St. Norbert's College. His publications in theology deal with a wide range of subjects, from the theology of the icon in Orthodox theology to eschatology, and from the history and mission in Asia to contemporary issues in enculturation and interreligious dialogue. You will find some of the titles of his many publications on your program. Professor Phan's many writings have received many awards from learned societies and have been translated in Italian, German, French, Spanish, Polish, Chinese, Japanese, and Vietnamese. A native of Vietnam, Professor Phan has reflected at length on the questions and challenges of the enculturation of Christianity in Asia and on the enculturation of Asian Christians in the West. He's also deeply immersed in the topic of interreligious dialogue and religious pluralism, and we are therefore deeply grateful that he has accepted our invitation to be our plenary speaker tonight, and I invite you to help me welcome Professor Phan.
I feel a bit like coming home. I've been at Boston College many, many times, and of course I have a lot of friends here. I knew Catherine Cornell when she was still doing her doctoral work at Leuven, imagine years ago. And now, imagine here, we are together in the same place. Thank you for coming, for the honor of giving this introductory lecture to this series on culture, religion, and interreligious dialogue. Last night, I went to a Chinese restaurant and have dinner, and this is the cookie that came out of it. Present your best ideas today to an eager and welcoming audience. I'm sure it is eager or welcoming, and I try to give out the best ideas. And the friend of mine who was sitting there, her fortune cookie is, I am kidding, here it is, I'm not making it up. God will give you everything that you want. What does God have to do with a Buddhist restaurant? I do not know, but there it was. I say I am not making it up. The title of my presentation is The Mutual Shaping of Cultures and Religions Through Interreligious Dialogue. I have been tasked to discuss the process in which culture and religion shape each other, and the role, if any, of interreligious dialogue within it. The theme, while fascinating, is vastly and undoubtedly complex. In postmodernity, all the three realities under consideration, namely culture, religion, and interreligious dialogue, are vigorously contested, which makes considerations of their mutual relationships even more intricate and controversial. Yet it is urgent for us to approach these relationships as religions, contrary to the vastly premature and much trumpeted obituaries, have not only endured, but have also flourished in places least expected. There is widespread talk of, quote, the return of religion, especially in the public square. Furthermore, globalization and migration, to mention just two important contemporary movements, have rendered the encounter among the followers of different religions not only a daily necessity for survival, but also opportunities for either peace building or clash of civilizations. In general, the connotation of culture is larger than religion, insofar as there can be no religion except as inculturated in particular cultures, whereas there may be a culture that has no religion as one of its intrinsic components. Similarly, religion is connotatively larger than interreligious dialogue, since there can be no interreligious dialogue without at least two religions, unless you talk to yourself, you know. Whereas there may be a religion that regards interreligious dialogue as theological impermissible. Many religions have done so for a long time. Theoretically, then, it is not inconceivable that culture and religion can exist apart from each other as two hermetically sealed circles, without any interaction, either one-way or two-way between them, just as it is possible that a particular religion can shut itself off from any interreligious dialogue. From the historical point of view, then, it is indisputable that culture and religion, as traditionally defined, have interacted with each other, mutually shaping and reshaping the identities and the sphere of influence through the course of their developments, as much as often it is not easy to tell where culture begins and religion, where culture ends and religion begins. The issue then is not whether there has been a reciprocal interaction between religion and culture. You don't need to invite me for this. Everybody knows that. But rather how this process of mutual interaction, fertilization has taken place in history. In surveying this process, which may be called inculturation of religion, or better still, interculturation between religion and culture, it may be asked whether there are new factors in our time that impact positively or negatively on this process. Among these factors, no doubt, interreligious dialogue obtains pride of place. The central issue is for this evening, for us, can be formally briefly this. Thus, how does interreligious dialogue affect the process of mutual shaping between culture and religion? That's the focus of our presentation. But even with this narrow scope, the theme is still too vast and remains at a boringly abstract level. To avoid bland and banal generalities about this relationship between culture and religion, I propose to examine the mutual shaping of culture and religion and the role of interreligious dialogue within it, with historical references to Christianity. Though it is hoped that my reflections will also prove helpful in understanding the relationship between culture and religions and their own cultures, in particular Judaism and Islam, the other two Abrahamic religions or religions of the book. As to the time frame for our inquiry, it is limited to all intents and purposes to the last 50 years, or for Roman Catholics, to the post-Vatican II era. Since interreligious dialogue as a genuine dialogical activity between Christianity and other religions was officially undertaken only since the Second Vatican Council, 1962 and 1965. So I begin with a brief consideration of contemporary understandings of culture and religion. I then move to inquire into how they mutually shape each other. And thirdly and finally, I explore the role of interreligious dialogue in the dynamics of interaction between culture and religion. So that's my 3 points. It's typical of a Jesuit institution. Everything has to be 3 points. My paper, I wrote it for publication. It's quite long, 45 pages. And I tried to limit myself into 50 or 55, so get to half. So it's about 20 pages. So if any one of you have paid full price, you're entitled to a discount of 50% because the paper only half of what I have written, although I covered the main points. I'm sorry my respondent had to read the entire paper. The first point, culture and religion, contemporary critics. It has been mentioned above that today the very concept of culture, religion, and interreligious dialogue are highly contested. To describe the mutual shaping between culture and religion, it may be helpful to give a very brief outline of the postmodern understandings of these two realities, culture and religion. These understandings will no doubt render more complex the question of the mutual shaping between religion and culture. The first point is about culture. What have we changed in our understanding of culture? The title is From Integrating or Integration to Context of Relations. Just a slogan to summarize this development. Since our theme is the mutual shaping between culture and religion, and more specifically between culture and Christianity, I will use a book by a very famous theologian, H. Richard Niebuhr, the classic Christ and Culture. It was published about 60 years ago, but it still serves as a very helpful launching pad for our discussion of religion and culture, our Christianity and culture. Now, in this book, which we celebrate 2 years ago, the 60th anniversary, Niebuhr argues that culture should not be taken simply as secular or godless, or idolatrous or anti-God, or particular, Greco-Roman or American. But rather, it referred to a particular human activity. So that the sense, when he wrote in 1950s, it began as a series of lectures published in a book. He understood culture as, and I quote, that total process of human activity and that total result of such activity. So, end quote. In this sense, Niebuhr notes, culture is characterized by 7 features. First, it is always social and communal activity. It is not something done by just any one of us. Second, it is an achievement of human creativity. It's not just a natural act, biological act. Third, it is a design guided by a world of values. Fourth, it is geared towards serving the human good. Fifth, it aims at realizing the human good in temporal and material terms. So there is art, there is buildings, there is music, and so forth. Sixthly, it concerns with both creating and conserving values. So there is a process of transmission. And seventh, finally, it is pluralistic. Already in 1950s, it talks about that. In the sense that it is the values that seeks to realize in different time and place and in very different ways. Now, this is the definition of culture that is prevalent in the 1950s, 60s. Niebuhr's notion of culture, as I just mentioned above, faithfully reflects the modern anthropological understanding of culture, one to which American readers of the second half of the 20th century could readily relate to. It is this concept of culture, much in ascendancy during Niebuhr's time, that accounts for the enormous success of his book, Christ and Culture. Now, a shift. This anthropological usage of culture, which emerged in the 1920s and prominent in British and US anthropologies, highlights its socially constructed nature, its group differentiating function, its holistic character, and its context-dependent development. So that is the general concept that we, for a long time in American anthropology, and we theologians take over and reflect on the relation between religion and culture. There's a lot of advantages in this concept of understanding culture. As Robert Schreider has noted here, the concept of culture as an integrated system of beliefs, values, and behavioral norms has much to commend it. Among other things, he points out, it promotes holism and a sense of coherence and community in opposition to the fragmentation of mass society is congenial to the harmonizing both and way of thinking, particularly for Roman Catholics, and it's prevalent in oral cultures and serve as an antidote to the corrosive effect of modernity and capitalism. In recent years, however, this modern anthropological concept of culture has been subjected to a searing critique by self-styled postmodern thinkers. The view of culture is as a self-contained and clearly bounded whole, as an internally consistent and integrated system of beliefs, values, and behavioral norms that functions as the ordering principle of the social group and into which we members are socialized, has been shown to be based on unjustified assumptions. Rather than as a sharply demarcated, self-contained, homogeneous, and integrated whole, culture today is seen as, quote, a ground of contest in relations. Robert Schreiter himself adopted this phrase. And as a historically evolving, fragmented, inconsistent, conflicted, constructed, ever-shifting, and porous social reality. This is an important shift today when we look at culture. In this context of relation, the role of power in the shaping of cultural identity is of paramount importance, a factor that the modern concept of culture largely ignores. In the past, anthropologists tended to regard culture as an innocent set of conventions rather than a conflicted reality in which the colonizers, the powerful, the wealthy, the victors, the dominant, can obliterate the beliefs and values of the colonized, the weak, the poor, the vanquished, and the subjugated. And so they are the one who writes about culture. And you have to read Michel Foucault to understand all the stuff that he has written. This predicament of culture is exacerbated by the process of globalization, in which the ideals of modernity and technological reason are extended throughout the world. Globalization as extension, aided and abetted by a single economic system, the neoliberal capitalism, and new modern communication technologies. In postmodernity, culture is seen as in its lived reality of fragmentation, conflict, and ephemerality. Cultural meanings are not simply discovered ready-made, but are constructed and produced in the violent cauldron of asymmetrical power relations. It recognizes the important role of power in the formation of cultural identity. Furthermore, it sees culture as a historical process, intrinsically mutable, and without an a priori clearly defined telos, and a controllable and predictable synthesis. And of course, there are some negative things you can say about as well, but what I'm interested in is to show you the shift between the understanding culture as something integrated into something that is conflictive, that is porous, that is changeable, in which power plays a key role. That's about culture. What about religion, the second component? The context here I propose is the post-colonial context to understand religion. No less contested is the notion of religion. Today, culture, religion, is preferably used in the plural. As a matter of fact, the title of the essays is Cultures and Religions, just as Christianities rather than Christianity. Beginning of this year, I have a book come out from Wiley, Blackwell, the original title was Christianity in Asia. And I wrote to the publisher, please change it into Christianities. And they say, no, we can't do, we already advertise, we already put it in the website, you change the title. You can. I said, no, you change the title, Christianities in Asia. And now you have the title Christianities in Asia rather than Christianity. I may sell fewer books than before, but that's okay. There is a plethora of detailed historical studies of how the term religion, Greek threskeia, or Latin religio, has been used in the West to determine the different meanings. And that's easily accessible. You can go and look at the word religion, how it is used. I have here 5 different meanings of the term, how it used consecutively, it changes all the time, so that there is not one definition of religion. As to the definition of religion, there are perhaps as many of them as there are religious people. And they vary widely depending on the disciplinary perspective, whether you are sociologist, or psychologist, or a theologian. And above all, depends on the biases you have. Modernity has produced a plethora of theories of religion. And there's a book, convenient book by Daniel Pals, P-A-L. It's called 8 Definitions of Religion. And after this lecture, you add 10 more to that new book, 18 Definitions of Religion. Modernity has, so defining religion seems to be a distinctly Western concern. We Chinese, Professor Pui-Lan, we're not concerned about defining religion. We just leave it, you know. But somehow there's a Western concern to define it, especially since the 18th century. Partly with a view to neutralize the influence of Christianity in public life and to confine it to the private sphere, partly as a result of newly acquired knowledge of so-called Oriental religions, attempts were made to reduce religion to what can be established by reason alone, naturalis religio. Christianity, thus, is now considered as a religion among others, not the religion, not Augustine's vera religio. There is thus a movement from exclusivism, you want to use it, wherein Christianity is asserted to be the only true religion, to pluralism, which hold that there are many and diverse religions in the plural, more or less true and good, belong to our general genre, genus religion. This is very much an 18th and 19th century phenomenon. Like the modern religion, notion of culture, this modern understanding of religion has been subjected to severe criticism. This time from the perspective of post-colonial and sub-Banton studies. Professor Sun Abraham has written on this point, and we look forward to hear from her. It has been argued that the modern notion of religion as naturalis religio, this abstract notion of religion, and is indeed the legacy of the European Enlightenment and its attempt to negotiate the relationship between Christianity and the emerging nation states, like the issue of church-state relations, and the status of Christianity vis-a-vis the newly discovered Asian religions. So you have the emergence of discipline called comparative religion. Now these are some of the critiques of this understanding of religion. First, it has been pointed out that the universal reason, the ratio that the Enlightenment is so proud of from Kant onwards, on which the naturalist religion is based, is not at all universal, as it claims to be, but a highly particular form of Enlightenment anti-religious and even anti-woman rationality, arrogating to itself universal and exclusive validity. We have heard that quite often, this kind of criticism. Secondly, this conceptual religion assumes, even in deist version, that monotheism represents the highest stage of humanity's religious development. So it moved from polytheism to henotheism to polytheism. That's the way how scholar of religion have reconstructed. And therefore, this notion of religion fails to duly acknowledge the religious status of polytheistic and non-theistic religions such as Hinduism and Buddhism respectively. So it failed to really take the other religions seriously because it starts from this historical evolutionist perspective. Thirdly, the modern notion of religion, despite its explicit anti-Christian bias, is ironically parasitic upon the Christian, mostly Protestant Christianity, especially in the theology of God, revelation. And they use this idea as criteria for evaluating non-Christian religions and then exclude certain beliefs and practices from the category of religion. So they say, is Confucianism a religion? Well, it doesn't talk about God, therefore it's not. It does talk about the afterlife, therefore it's not. So they use the criteria deriving from Christianity, quietly, without telling anybody, and use them as criteria, judging, excluding other religions. Finally, the modern understanding of religion suffers from an unawareness of the relation between the production of knowledge and its diverse contexts and grounds. More specifically, it disconnects the claim to absolute and universal truth from the exercise of power in all its forms, especially political and religious. As Edward Said has argued in literary criticism, Talal Asad in the study of religion, and Ranjit Guha in Substantive studies, Orientalism has functioned as the lens through which the Middle East and Asia were projected as the irrational, the feminized, the weak other, to be dominated by the rational, the strong, the masculine West. Politically, the Orientalist discourse is claimed to have aided and abetted Western imperialistic and colonialist enterprise. Now, it is not my intention to enter this debate. I just simply say that given this shift in understanding both religion, both culture and religion, the question for us tonight becomes so complicated. That is the mutual shaping between religion and culture. And now I move to the second part. Culture, religion, how do the twain mutually shape each other? If you look at the history of culture and religion, you see that nobody doubts that religion and culture shape each other. I mean, that's historical fact. And so the question is how. But if you look at the two dimensions, culture shaping religion, religion shaping culture, from the literature that you read, what has been given most attention to? How religion shape culture. Very little the reverse, how culture shape religion. And tonight I will focus on the second question more, how culture shape religion. How religion shape culture is not that interesting or debated. Why is it there is this discrepancy between so much attention to the question of religion shaping culture and so little on culture shaping religion? Well, fear. Fear of syncretism, anxiety about the dilution or the loss of Christian identity, and the concern to preserve uniformity and even ecclesiastical control. So somehow you could understand a little less willingness to entertain the possibility and the reality and the dynamics of how culture shapes religion. Let me start with the easy question. Christianity or religion shaping cultures? That's an easy one. Among theological accounts of how religion, and more specifically Christianity, relate and shapes culture, arguably the best book is still Richard Niebuhr, Christ and Culture, I already mentioned. Now in this book, he mentioned 5 typologies throughout history, how Christianity or Christ relate to culture, and he summarized these 5 typologies by 5 prepositions. Christ against culture, in more fundamentalist circles, both Catholic and Protestants, Christ against church. Christ of culture, the liberal theology, while in Christianity somehow is totally absorbed by culture. Please note that he talks about typology. He doesn't say that there is exactly in history these type, but the way you could see Christianity, how Christianity relate to culture. The third, Christ or Christian above culture, a kind of a synthesis of culture and religion. Christ and culture in paradox, he associated with Luther. And the final one, Christ transforming culture, he associated with Augustine and Calvin. Now, for our purposes, it is not necessary to go all over the summary of this, but to understand whether within the postmodern notion of culture and religion, as I just explained, whether there are other typologies possible besides the 5 that Richard Niebuhr presented us some 60 years ago. So I would like to note that it's very interesting, Niebuhr still used Christianity in the singular, not Christianities. For him, it's only one, and of course, mainly Protestant. Although he's much aware of the ecumenical issues, all that, but basically he's speaking from the Protestant perspective. And secondly, for him, culture is still singular. As he explained at the beginning, I have the 7 elements of culture. And for him, therefore, one could reject culture, against, or one could be immersed of culture, or one can take a kind of dialectical relations by synthesizing them, by putting them in contrast, or by transforming them. Now, it seems to me, when you look at the Roman Catholic tradition, the last typology, Christ transforming culture, seems to be closest to the Catholic position. And to do that, we just look at Vatican II. When you look at Vatican II document, the Constitution, the Church in the modern world, looked like that of the 5 typologies of Niebuhr, the last one to be most congenial to us because it is both and it is theological, it's transformative. And here's the text that I take just for your purpose. I take it from Gaudium et Spes number 58. I cite, "The good news of Christ continually renews the life and culture of fallen humanity. It combats and removes the error and evil which flow from the ever-present attraction of sin. It never ceases to purify and elevate the morality of peoples. It takes the spiritual qualities and endowments of every age and nation and enriches them with heavenly resources, causes them to bear fruit, as it were, from within. It fortifies, completes, and restores them in Christ. In this way, the church carries out its mission, and in this act, it stimulates and advances human and civil culture, as well as contributing by its activity, including liturgical activity, to humanity's interior freedom. Well, I don't want to dispute this, but the distance of 50 years, 2013, this passage seemed to me to be patronizing, tendentious, and even disingenuous, especially since the Council has made only one acknowledgement that itself, the Church, can be enriched by cultures. In other words, the movement is only one way. We enrich you, we ennoble you, we correct you, we elevate you, but never say we can be enriched, corrected, enlightened by the cultures. I have no doubt, and you all will agree with me, that Christianity has shaped various cultures in different ways. In symbols, in architecture, in art, in meals, in calendar, in understanding gender, and all the institutions for care of the poor, the widows, or of the sick. That, I don't think I need to go long. You all agree with me that Christianity has done an excellent job with all humility. But the other side, is Christianity shaped by the cultures? That is a more controversial question and more interesting question, so I spent some time on this. As important and long-lasting as these contributions I just mentioned of Christianity to society and to cultures have been, and very heavily beautiful, historically speaking, however, this has never been unidirectional, especially in the case of a religion as incarnational as Christianity. To understand how Christianity has shaped culture, it is necessary to reverse the order, to rephrase the question. How cultures have shaped Christianity? Again, there is little doubt that throughout history, cultures have molded and shaped and reshaped Christianity, producing a variety of Christianities, as I have said. We have heard the phrase, the Constantinian era of Christianity, from the 4th century to the 20th century. This alone should alert us to the length and the depth of the centuries-long impact, for good or for ill, of the cultures on Christianity, which produced Christendom. In turn, it was the development in European cultures, especially modernity and secularization, that brought Christendom to an end. So the reverse is true. One of the effects of the impact of culture on Christianity is diversity and pluralism within the Christian churches. This phenomenon is taking place even within the Roman Catholic Church, whose centripetal forces is beyond doubt. In spite of its powerful centralizing strategies and structures, the Roman Catholic Church is becoming less and less Roman and more Catholic with a small c. That is, culturally polycentric and multiform, especially as we talk about the southern shift. That is, the population of Christians, particularly Roman Catholic, is shifting from the global north, Europe and the United States, to the global south. It is projected that by the year 2050, many of you will be alive still, only 1 in 5 is white Christian. Get used to it. 1 in 5. At the time, to talk about a white Christian is as exotic as a Swedish Buddhist today. Within the Catholic Church, awareness of the contribution of culture to the formation of Christianity and therefore to diversity of Christianity came to a head at Vatican II. We all know that. The famous bon mot or carana about Vatican II is that it marks the end of Western Christianity and the beginning of the, he called it, world church, die Weltkirche. Now, what is new with Vatican II is this awareness of the cultural matrix of religion, and therefore of Christianity and of cultural diversity. And therefore, for Vatican II, clearly, it is not the model Christ against culture, or Christ of culture, or Christ even above culture, or Christ in paradox with culture, but rather Christ transforming culture. It seems to me to be reading this without the Augustinian pessimism that you find in Niebuhr's exposition of the 5th category. Now, let me read this famous text that Vatican II talks about, that in Gaudium et Spes, that Vatican II talks about that the joys and the hope of the people are the joy and the hope of the Christian people themselves, of the world. Therefore, it's a question of what, whether, but how. I'd like to move quickly. I'd like to see 6 areas in which culture has shaped Christianity. Very quick, just give you an example you can think of. It's not simply Christianity or religion shaping culture, but the reverse. Culture shaping Christianity. First, you take the 4 C's of religion: the creed, the code, the cult, therefore doctrine, ethics, worship, and community, the 4 C's. You can see that in every single of this category, culture has shaped religion. Now add to it 2 more, spirituality and the arts. I give an example. How could we think of at least Western theology without the impact, let's say, of Greek philosophy or of Roman Western philosophy? Or even if you go to India, how could you understand, how could you do Christian theology without paying attention to Advaita? Or you go to China without thinking of the influence of Confucianism. So there is always these philosophies that have impact upon the way we formulate doctrine. Secondly, talk about ethics, the code. How could we understand Christian ethics without thinking about the impact of Stoicism, of today, the human rights theory? We did not make them up. They impact upon our way of thinking of the human dignity. Of worship, think about the role of popular religions, practices at the grassroots, processions, relics. All these can impact the way we live Christianity, worship. In organization, in structure, in community, we all know the Roman law, the way the Roman law organizes has been shaping the way the Catholic Church shapes itself. In spirituality and mysticism, the impact of Neoplatonism through Dionysius, the pseudo-Areopagite, is profound. Architecture and art, it is enough to visit major church buildings, browse art galleries and museums, or even attend concerts to appreciate the extent to which architecture and the arts have shaped Christianity. It is important to note that my point here is not simply that religion or Christianity has shaped the arts, which is patently true. Christianity not only has provided the arts with subject matter and from the stories of the Bible, the saints, the various events of Jesus' life and Mary's life. You can't go to any museum without knowing this. Rather, my point is that cultures, in all their achievements, have contributed in various and significant ways in the shaping of the very identity of Christianity. Yes. Okay. So it seems to me that today, when you look at the way in which culture shapes religion, you have to say that it is having a powerful impact in the way we understand who we are and how we shape our identity as Christian. Time going on, I go to the last part. It's about, within this, how interreligious dialogue play a role. I'd like to simply acknowledge the fact that today we are living in an age where interreligious dialogue is not just a luxury or something we do aside, but it is part of who we are as religious people. Again, I cite Robert Schreiter. He talks about the new Catholicity in which people become global and local at the same time. Thomas Berry talks about the ecological age. Edward Cousin talks about the third exo age. And Wayne Tisdale talks about the interspiritual age. It seems to me, therefore, interreligious dialogue, the way we live with other people, the way it shapes, it's become part of who we are. In the paper, I propose 3 areas in which this interreligious dialogue has shaped the way we think being Christian. The first is the doctrine of Trinity. If we want really to engage seriously in the work of interreligious dialogue, we have to reconceptualize, rethink how the Christian history and the Christian life is Trinitarian and not simply Christological or theistic or one God, but truly the Father, God the Father, has worked truly in history, to use the language of Irenaeus, in his 2 hands, the Logos and the Pneuma. The second doctrine is a doctrine of the church. The church, I know Vatican II has different images, but today we see the church exists not for itself, not simply just to promote its geographical or numerical expansion, but as a service to the reign of God. And the last notion I propose in the paper is the notion of an interspiritual spirituality. That is to be today, as I put it at the end of the paper, that to be religious is to be interreligious. And it is this dialogue that shapes the way we are as Christians and as culture. It's a long paper. I try to summarize it all, but my respondent will highlight some of the other stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Phan, for these very helpful opening comments. Our first respondent this evening is Professor Susan Abraham. Professor Abraham is Assistant Professor of Ministry Studies and Associate Director of the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard Divinity School. Prior to joining the faculty at Harvard in 2007, she was Associate Professor of Theology at St. Bonaventure College. She's a native of India and was active in youth ministry in Mumbai prior to coming to teach in the United States. Her research and teaching focus on the areas of feminism and postcolonial theory. Her recent publications include Identity, Ethics, and Nonviolence in Postcolonial Theory, Iranian Assessment in 2007, and Shoulder to Shoulder, Frontiers in Catholic Feminist Theology in 2009. Professor Abraham is a much appreciated participant and dialogue partner in many different forums in the Boston area, and we are looking forward to her comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for your invitation to be here at Boston College. I intend my comments to be supplemental in relation to Professor Phan's great paper. My comments are methodological, and forgive me, a little abstract in nature, but I'm interested in one of the questions that he raised, which is how culture shapes religion. It seems to me that we have come very far in theorizing interreligious, intercultural, and intercontextual dialogues. But one thing still remains to be done. I delve deep into post-colonial theory. I can't help it. I have been asked often how my Indian identity contributes to my theological work. I really don't know, other than what is India, the idea of India is already shaped within a post-colonial imagination. But one of the things post-colonial theory does not do is to construct the common binary of self and other. It is a way of thinking. It is a disposition, an intellectual attitude that one brings to the construction of knowledges in the academy. So one of the people I ventriloquize a lot is Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, an exemplar who speaks of political agency in the construction of such knowledges. Here is a definition of post-coloniality that she presents, which may be a little bit abstract, but really captures her sense of what post-colonial theory is supposed to do. It is, she says, quote, a persistent effort at training the imagination. It is a task which the progressive rationalization of education fails at all over the world. So this is the heart of post-colonial theory. It's a little abstract, it's not programmatic, it's not easy to digest, but this is what it is, a training of the imagination that all our educational curricula around the world fails to do. This is from her book called Other Asias. And I thought it was pertinent to quote from this book, because what you have in this panel here is the plurality of Asia. Only such a training in the imagination can result in significant epistemic changes. At the heart of Professor Phan's talk is this challenge to think beyond the modern epistemological categories that we are so used to. One of the ways in which a training of the imagination happens in the classroom, Spivak says, we have to rearrange desire, more abstraction. What does it mean to rearrange desire in the classroom? Oftentimes in the classroom, a desire is for control and mastery. What happens in the context of post-coloniality, where desire is reshaped before an ethical imperative? That's what she's talking about. The ethical imperative at hand is not so much the exotic other. It's not so much the difference of the other. It is the radical plurality of what has been considered a unique, singular identity. How many Asias are there? The point of all of this, rearranging desire, training the imagination, is to decolonize knowledge. If Edward Said, of blessed memory now, is right at all, what our knowledges did, even in theology, in religion, in anthropology, in all of our humanities, was to create an orientalized other. That was colonial knowledge. How do we decolonize knowledge of both the self and the other is the critical ethical question when we are talking about culture, religion, and most of all, dialogue. What dialogue is possible between folks, one of whom is a self and the other is an orientalized other? So here I was messing around in her work, and I began to read a very early essay that she wrote, and the title of this essay is Explanation and Culture. She wrote this in 1979, and she made a charge that when we talk about culture, we should avoid explanations. So if you were here waiting to hear me say what an Indian woman thinks, you will not get anything. That would be an explanation. I couldn't possibly speak for 500 million people, at least. But when we use the category culture, she says, we need to use it not as explanation, but as an intervention. I'm wondering here, Professor Phan, if this is your fifth or sixth model, perhaps a relationship between religion and culture, the model of intervention. It is very critical to understand that when Spivak mobilizes post-coloniality, she is absolutely not talking about marginality. That refers to a kind of identity politics that went out of fashion in 1989, I think. We still do it. We imagine that culture confers on us certain identity categories, and that what makes us true, what makes us truthful, what makes us ethical or political is this exotic identity. It isn't. But there is a way in which one becomes marginal in the academy, and that is to be critical. That is not just to be critical, it is to be a feminist. I've said the F word now. Not just to be a feminist, but to be a Marxist feminist. I've said the M word now. Not just to be a critical Marxist feminist, a deconstructive critical Marxist feminist. One attains marginality by being critical. That would be the most critical issue, or the most important idea to understand post-coloniality. Another thing it trains us to do, it trains the imagination to do, is to read whole genres in a very transgressive way. One should train the imagination, she says, to read poetry not as poetry, but to read poetry and look for its conceptual underpinnings. We are so used to looking for concept in theory. How about transgressing the disciplining of disciplines and making it reveal what's behind its construction? Simultaneously, while you read theory and history, if you're going to train the imagination, you read theory and history for metaphor. What would this do for knowledge? Imagine knowledge in our sciences that are metaphorical. Imagine knowledge in our art that is conceptual. As she's explaining this, she uses certain words of poetry that would only be too familiar to many of us here in this room today. It is an example of what Professor Phan has called culture shaping Christianity. These are the words she uses. O blessed rage for order, pale Ramon. The makers rage to order the words of the sea, words of fragrant portals, dimly starred, and of ourselves and of our origins, in ghostlier demarcations, keener sounds. You know what I speak of. David Tracy produced the sexiest title in theology, I think, with his Blessed Rage for Order. And I read it many, many years ago in Professor Schreiter's class. Thank you very much for all your many gifts to me. What does a post-colonial theorist have in common with a Catholic theologian? Well, some of us, Professor Kwok and myself, read a lot of Spivak, and many of us who read her have realized that we think she is a closet reader of theology. Without a doubt, I would think this 1979 essay was written after David Tracy's book. It is not at all unlikely that Spivak would have picked up a book with a very catchy title. So she reads this to prove her point that poetry yields concept and history and theory yields metaphor. What is really interesting is why Spivak and Tracy use this poem. This poem, as you know, is Wallace's poem. Oh gosh, I don't have it. It's over there. In any case, I don't have the title of it. It's Idea of Order at Key West. That's what it is. Here are some preceding lines of the poem. When I read it in 1991, I thought the maker's voice referred to God. It wasn't that at all. The poem is about a single solitary lass. What is it with poets and solitary lasses? They're all singing, and these guys are listening to them. They go and write poetry. It's some woman singing by the beach. And what Wallace writes about her is, her voice it was that made the sky acutest at its vanishing. She measured to the hour its solitude. She was the single artificer of the world in which she sang, the maker. And when she sang, the sea, whatever self it had, became a self that was her song, for she was the maker. Then we, the two people observing her, then we, as we beheld her striding there alone, knew that there never was a world for her except the one she sang and singing made. Wallace himself was very interested in thinking of how thought could be thought in ways other than in words. What about thought that comes to be in song? Tracy, writing his preface, digesting this poem, producing his great title, prays in the preface of his 1995 edition. He says, quote, I hope Blessed Rage for Order may help further ghostlier demarcations, may help make further keener sounds for many other readers to help us all find and articulate whatever tentative orders any of us can achieve. In 1972 or 3, whenever he wrote it, and in 1995, here is our brief as theologians, intercontextual theologians, as theologians who take culture seriously. Immediately what we have is multiplicity. Immediately what we have is theology arising in a transgressive reading of genres. But one of the things he says that is missing in his work, in Blessed Rage for Order, which he was never able to do, was to acknowledge the ghostly demarcation of a feminist consciousness that is the most troubling presence as absence in the book. In 1995, he says, but read it today, given the feminist developments that we've been watching, and he says in Latin, sic transit gloria masculini. An intervention should be made. Spivak's decolonizing argument that the category culture must intervene by changing both form and content in theology with an attention to metaphor and song. However, Theology's blessed rage for order only permits for ghostly demarcations of feminist consciousness of the categories in question. What yet remains to be done, perhaps in ghostly song and dance, is to acknowledge the spectral presences of feminist consciousness to create the discontinuous epistemology that we really need to decolonize our imagination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Our second respondent this evening is Professor Kwok Pui-Lan. Professor Kwok is the William Cole Professor of Christian Theology and Spirituality at the Episcopal Divinity School. She's currently also president of the American Academy of Religion. And for students unfamiliar with this organization, it's a gigantic organization with thousands of members that unites once a year for a major meeting. And the presidents of this organization are eminent scholars who are chosen by their peers. So it's really an honor for us to have Professor Kwok with us today. A pioneer in Asian feminist theology and postcolonial theology, she is the author of 15 books in English and Chinese. These books include Postcolonial Imagination and Feminist Theory in 2005, Introducing Asian Feminist Theology in 2000, Discovering the Bible and the Non-Biblical World in 2003, and Chinese Women and Christianity in 1992. She most recently edited a volume with a beautiful title, Hope Abundant, Third World and Indigenous Women's Theology. A native of China, she has been deeply involved in the topic of our conference, primarily as it relates to feminist issues. We look forward to hearing her response to Peter Phan.
I would like to thank Professor Peter Phan for his comprehensive and inspiring paper. I also want to thank Professor Susan Abraham for her very evocative response. I appreciate Professor Phan's understanding of culture as dynamic and changing, and as size of context in power relations. Such an understanding leads him to question H. Richard Niebuhr's classic, Christ and Culture. Professor Phan criticized Niebuhr's anthropological understanding of culture and Niebuhr's assumption that Christianity is itself acultural and can, from this acultural position, relate to culture in different ways. With a postcolonial sensitivity, Professor Phan is also highly critical of the Church's collusion with colonialism and cultural imperialism. He writes in his paper, the Catholic Church is more concerned with shaping cultures and less, if at all, with being shaped by cultures. He is also very bold to say, and we heard him saying that, the pastoral constitution on the Church in the modern world, though seen as progressive at its time, sounds half a century later rather patronizing, tendentious, and even disingenuous. When I read that, I said, wow. I would like to supplement Professor Phan's paper by drawing lessons from the cultural shaping of Christianity in several periods during the long history of China. Many of you have heard the Nestorian monument in Xi'an, China, erected in 781 in the Common Era. It provides the earliest evidence of Christianity in China. It records the arrival of missionaries from the East Syrian Church in 635 to spread what was then called the Numinist religion, Jingzhao. The monument shows a high degree of cultural adaptation, using Taoist and Buddhist terminologies in the religious traditions of 8th century China. The text summarized the essentials of the Christian message, including creation, Trinity, incarnation, and baptism into the church. It is very noteworthy that there is no mention of the bloody sacrifice on the cross as the act of redemption. In the 9th century, when the Chinese emperor turned against foreign religions, Buddhism was banned. The spread of Christianity was banned also because it was seen as so close to Buddhism in terms of both its religious language and its monastic form of life. Centuries later, when Matteo Ricci and other Jesuits arrived in the 16th century, they initially dressed in the robe of the Buddhist monks, but later they changed their dress to that of the scholarly class when they heard that the Chinese did not respect much of these monks. So Matteo Ricci learned Chinese, and needless to say, it's very difficult to learn. And at that time, not sufficient tools. We are not talking about dictionaries or something like that to help him. So he spent a lot of time learning the language and the Chinese classics, and finally won the respect of the emperor and the official class because of his genuine respect of Chinese customs and culture. And of course, because of his knowledge of mathematics, of Western calendar, and clock making. In his treatise, The True Meaning of the Law of Heaven, he argues that Confucianism and Christianity are very similar. He wanted to appeal to the Confucian literati, steeped in Confucianism and Chinese classics. He said, the Chinese people always believed in God, a term that can be found in their ancient classics. Christianity is the best and most perfect manifestations of their faith. The law of heaven, Tenju, which Christianity preached about, is identical to what the Chinese have always understood as God. Unlike the Franciscans and the Dominicans, Ricci supported the Chinese practice of the veneration of the ancestors. The Franciscans and the Dominicans, you recalled, felt that Ricci and the Jesuits had gone too far in their cultural adaptation and succeeded in convincing the Vatican to outlaw his approach. That, of course, led to what was called the rice controversy for several centuries. Later, when the Protestant missionaries arrived in the early 19th century, they worked among the working classes and adapted to Chinese popular religion. The Buddhists distributed religious tracts to propagate their beliefs. The early Protestant missionaries, I am talking about Robertson and Mill, followed suit and translated portions of the Bible and wrote simple vernacular religious tracts to be distributed in the market and public spaces. In Chinese popular religions, women were able to exercise certain leadership roles. The Protestant church hired Bible women to assist the missionaries to teach women and children to read. Since blood sacrifice was difficult for the Chinese to understand, one missionary interpreted that Jesus was like medicine, which would be good for people's ills. As these three examples, Nestorian Christianity, the Jesuits in China, and then the coming of the Protestant missionaries have shown, In order to get the message across, Christianity had to adapt to the codes of culture, as Robert Schreider has said. Professor Phan's paper has rightly criticized the Catholic Church's attempt of Latinization of the world. I wish he had touched more on the lengthy history of cultural adaptation that has been going on in many parts of the world for a very long time, before the terms contextualization or inculturalization came in vogue. Echoing Aloysius Paris, Professor Phan criticized the instrumentality of inculturation as translation. In his paper, he cites Father Aloysius Paris, who said, "Inculturation of Christianity as translation into Asia is often understood as the insertion of the Christian religion minus culture into an Asian culture minus non-Christian religion." Now, although this might have been the intention, we need to ask whether this is even possible. As post-colonial critics such as Gayatri Spivak and others have written, translation necessarily involves interpretation and negotiation in the context zone. I would argue that Asian Christianity has always been a hybrid. An interreligious encounter, if not dialogue, as we have come to understand it today, has shaped the interpretation of doctrines, the form of monastic life, and religious and communal life and leadership. The Chinese Bible, by the way, uses many Buddhist terms, such as heaven and hell. How do you translate those terms without using the indigenous terminologies? Now let me read you the opening verse of the prologue of the John's Gospel in Chinese. It will read something like this. "In the beginning was the Tao, and the Tao was with God, and the Tao was God." So when one reads the Chinese Bible, one is introduced to an interspiritual world, as Professor Phan describes, whether one is even conscious of it or not. It is because Asian Christians have always had a hybrid religious identity and experienced more than one religious tradition. Some of the most prominent writers on interreligious dialogue, including the late Raymond Penneker, Aloysius Paris, Stanley Amartham, and Professor Phan himself, has come from an Asian background. They have been leading the effort of dialogue because they have been religious or Christian interreligiously, as Professor Phan has said. Lest we may think that this way of being Christians happens only in far-away lands such as Asia or Africa, let me hasten to add that it is taking place to a certain extent in the United States. We all know that membership in white middle-class mainline denominations have been in decline since the 60s. Many people have turned to New Age spirituality, which incorporates some Native American and Asian religious traditions. Many Christians have tried Tai Chi. Maybe some of you have tried that too. If not, maybe Zen Buddhist meditation. How about yoga or other Eastern forms of spiritual healing? While some have criticized the eclectic and commercialized style of New Age spirituality, it might meet the spiritual needs of people who are dissatisfied with a church that is so dualistic, body-denying, hierarchical, and patriarchal. interspiritual and multiple belonging can also be found among racial and ethnic minority Christian churches. Hispanic Latino Christians now make up almost or even more than 40% of the US Catholics. In the next evangelicalism, Songcha Rad observes that the fastest growing evangelical churches in the United States are the racial minority churches. In these so-called ethnic churches, different cultures, festivals, and customs are being brought together. In the Black Episcopal churches, for example, members often include people from the Caribbean and Africa, in addition to native-born African Americans. They produced a hymnal called Lift Every Voice and Sing, which uses their music and reflects their religiosity. New immigrants often find these so-called ethnic churches a site for negotiating their identity in the cultural passage from their homeland to the United States. While these Black, Hispanic, Latino, and Asian churches may not engage in inter-religious dialogue consciously, they often support and promote different forms of spiritualities and cultures in their communal life. As the racial and ethnic minority will become the majority of the population in 3 decades or so, it may be too premature to tell what American Christianity will become. Using the postcolonial jargon of the center and periphery, if we focus on the center, for example, on the teachings of the church magisterium, things may change very slowly. But if we look at the periphery, we will see a lot of vitality and creativity that has happened both in the past and in the present. Post-colonial criticism challenged us to see histories as overlapping and intertwined, and the center and periphery as shifting and unstable. This public lecture kicks off a symposium on interreligious dialogue and cultural shaping of Buddhism, Christianity, Confucianism, Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism. And I look forward to the discussion this weekend and learn from other scholars whose specialty is in other religious traditions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kwok and Professor Abraham, for these wonderful responses, and again, Professor Phan, for this opening lecture. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but we do hope to see you again next year at our opening lecture. The focus of the symposium next year will be on women and interreligious dialogue. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.